Hey guys, just a quick note before we get into today's episode that due to all of the coronavirus craziness, there is some network congestion. So when I'm recording virtually with my guests, the sound quality is being reduced a little bit. But the good news is the guests who you want to listen to the most, they are crystal clear. The double good news is my craziness, it's me that's muffled. So you get to sort of like tune me out a little bit. So that's kind of good, I think. I guess it just depends on how you feel about that. But in any case, I am thankful that you're here. Thank you for being patient as we navigate all the things that we never even would have thought would have happened. But I appreciate your time. I appreciate your commitment to the show, and I'm excited to share this episode with you. All right, friends, here we go. Om.
Oh, hey, Becky.
Oh, hey, Danny.
How's it going?
It's good. How are you?
Did I catch you meditating?
No, I was just about to say, oh my God, have you seen the new Dharma Drops 3 mala bracelet from Spiritual Junkies?
Oh my gosh, aren't they amazing?
Amazing.
Amazing.
Oh, amazing. Oh, Danny, you're good.
I know.
Oh.
I try. Did you hear about the new code for Dharma Drops listeners?
No, what is it?
15% off with code Dharma Drops.
So you're telling me if people go to spiritualjunkies.com and use the promo code Dharma Drops, DHARMADROPS, they can get 15% off their next purchase.
That's right.
Oh my God, that's amazing. So I have the Dharma Drops 3 and tons of other bracelets from the spiritualjunkies.com site, and I can't wait to get more. So that means if you go to spiritualjunkies.com, SPIRITUALJUNKIES, spell that without looking at it, .com, you can save 15% on a single purchase using the promo code Dharma Drops, DHARMADROPS. This is Dharma Drops with your host, Rebecca Warfield. This podcast is a little bit about yoga, a little bit about life, and a little bit about whatever. And just as a warning, this podcast is unscripted, so that means I might regret a few things that I say. But hey, maybe I'll say some pretty awesome stuff too. Remember, these are musings, not truths. Buckle up, giddy up, because here we go. Hey, Dharma Drops listeners, it's me, your host of Dharma Drops podcast, Rebecca Warfield, and I am here with my childhood friend, Sherry Kellogg. How's it going, Sherry?
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. It's been forever since we've talked.
It's been, okay, wait, I was trying to remember today, how old were we when we met?
You know what? I was thinking of that too, and I want to say we were in the second grade, because I remember going to your cabin and remember
cabin in Western
yeah. And we had our like imaginary construction company. I don't know why I always remember that.
Yeah. And we built a desk.
Yeah, exactly. We built a desk. I think we called ourselves BS Builders, and we thought it was hilarious. Like second graders were like, oh, I'm saying BS. I don't know why I will always remember that. And we had
see that desk in my head right now.
Yeah, in the loft, like in the upstairs. Yeah. Always remember that. And like we had that like Disney sing-along tape. Do you remember?
Oh my God, that song, Friendship,
yeah.
Perfect friendship.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Exactly. Yeah. I was thinking of that the other day. I'm like, oh my God, there were such good memories like up at that cabin, like with that crazy desk we built from like scraps of wood.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. I forgot all about the desk. And actually, had you not mentioned that sing-along, I would not have ever remembered that song again. But what's so weird is how like now all the words are coming into my brain.
Yeah, it's totally in my head. I think of that all the time, like just like skipping around that loft singing. And it was only that song that we sang, I think, from that sing-along song.
Well, who would have known a few decades later, here we would be together, both yoga teachers.
Yeah, I know. Crazy. I was just thinking like our hometown, like do they even have a, yoga studio?
I don't think there was any yoga. I don't even know if I even heard of yoga until after I left Western Maryland.
Yeah, same. I think it was when I finally like left that it, was just one of those things. You just learn about it, you start, tinkering around and teaching yourself. And then it just kind of snowballs. Like everyone else, you just
Yeah.
catch the bug and it snowballs from there.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this before in the podcast, but I'm pretty sure the only time I'd ever really done yoga, because I don't really remember my first yoga class, but I did dance,
Right.
I was a ballerina.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I remember these teachers coming from the Ukraine and teaching us all this weird stuff like stretching on the floor that was really
Right.
strange. And
Yeah.
I think in hindsight, they were probably doing yoga with us, but they had limited
Right.
English. Our communication barrier was pretty,
Right.
pretty thick,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah.
So, I'm not exactly sure what we were doing, but it's so funny that here we are both yoga teachers and living in different parts of the country. So you are in San Antonio, correct?
I am. Yep. In South Texas.
Yes. And you are, I don't even know how to talk about it. Do you like to say married to the military, a spouse of the military?
Yeah.
What's the right language there?
I feel like I am married to the military. I mean, I'm a spouse, but I feel like they, Uncle Sam doesn't own us, but they own us. They control our lives. So yeah, for the next 6 years, I am married to the military until retirement is finally, the light is at the end of the tunnel.
I guess at this point, those 6 years, after all the other years you put in, 6 years is like, that'll wrap up quicker than you think. Maybe.
Yeah, we're on the downward stretch. I feel like it's gonna go fast, and I keep saying we need to probably start planning things because we're gonna blink and oh shit, 6 more months and you retire and we have nothing planned.
Yeah. So Sherry, tell me, how did you get to the yoga practice? Since obviously there was no yoga in Hagerstown, Maryland, what brought you to the practice?
Gosh, I think I left Maryland, went to college, and I don't come from a family that really values, any sort of physical activity. So it was not a part of their language, their everyday language. And when I went to school, I felt really plucked out. I was a first generation college student. I felt really plucked out of this bubble that I'd been living in Maryland. And the stress of that was just insane. So you just kind of, and that was the beginning of the internet. I feel like the early 2000s, people were just starting to have websites. And so I'd find little things or videos, workout videos, and just do them. And yoga it kind of became my little stress reliever or my workout in a way, and then it morphs into more than that. And then fast forward, got married to a guy in the Air Force, and then I really got plucked out of my safety zone. They sent us overseas, this tiny town in Spain, and if anyone's been stationed at a small base, they know how stressful that can be because everyone wants to be the prom queen. Everyone wants to be queen bee. And so you have a bunch of, military spouses vying for the top seat, and it's stressful. You're trying to figure out life in a foreign country. You're trying to find, fit into this, community. And so I just started doing yoga like crazy, and I couldn't really afford to go to a yoga studio. And it was 20 euros a class. Yeah. So it's it's not a cheap thing. And so again, you just start Googling. I think I remember my first full on yoga video on YouTube. And it was from Yoga Vine, this studio in Australia. It was Donna from the Yoga Vine or something like that. And I just started following Donna, and I just started teaching myself how to do some of this stuff. And it became my way of dealing with the stress of, living overseas is fun, but it was still a stressful thing. You still had to kind of deal with that. And it more, it sort of became really, truly an everyday practice instead of here and there. And then fast forward to, we had one deployment, we've had a few, but we had one deployment in particular that was super, super stressful. And then that's really when I dove head first. And I knew, okay, I probably need to, let me go to train, formal training for this. Let me get certified. It was a real, dive head first into this and be serious about it. So in a nutshell, that's kind of my little yoga journey.
Awesome. And so now you are working a lot with military families. And I think in particular, just based upon what I've seen in your social media, there's a lot of emphasis with military spouses, which kind of ties into the release of this episode. The day that we're recording, for those of you listening, is April 29th, but this won't be going live until, what is it, May 8th, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's Military Spouse Appreciation Day.
Yep.
So what sort of work are you doing right now for military families and military spouses?
Yeah. So kind of the problem that I saw when we were stationed in this one, military town, they had a few yoga studios, and I went to them, and I was thankful, they had classes, later at night. I could go after work. But then like the more I was like in the studio, I was realizing there's this niche, there's this like need for military spouses and their families, like for spouses in particular. Sometimes, cost can be a huge barrier. I know, in the small town that I was living in Georgia, you could go to a yoga class for like $8. And so that's not a huge reach for some people, it's not a huge burden. But now that we're in San Antonio, you're not going to really find a class for less than $15. And so that's when you're moving into the territory of like, I can't really afford to do this. Mm-hmm. And so that was like the first thing I saw. It wasn't, some of the studios weren't like super inclusive to the active duty guys, because there's still kind of this stigma, and you're dealing with, some of these active duty guys. If you think about the younger ones who are living on base, they work out all the time, they have some different physical needs that need to be met. And when you're teaching like a Baptiste power yoga, it's just not going to really work for a guy who's like super tight. Like it's just not, it might not be super accessible to them. And then of course, like the childcare thing, if a spouse is, in the middle of a deployment, they can't really go to a yoga class, or maybe even do it at the house because they have their kids there. So it becomes I started to notice some of these burdens. And so what I have been doing is been working directly on the base level, like going onto the bases and, forgive me. So like we're an Air Force family. And so I'll go to like the squadrons and just say, hey, let me offer a yoga class, for the active duty guys. Like maybe that's part of their PT one day, or let's get all of the wives together and offer, a spouse class, or like a mommy and me class, or a daddy and me class for all of the spouses. And it's when I do it on the base level, I make it free because it's just, I want it to be accessible to these families. And so, for other folks that want to get involved at the base level, like the battalions or the companies, if you're dealing with Army, Navy, Marines, that kind of thing. But just dealing with the smaller groups, like maybe the civil engineers or the cops, like just going in to their little groups and saying, hey, can I offer a yoga class? And sometimes it feels a lot more comfortable and a lot more welcoming because you're not in, and I'm not saying this about all studios, but sometimes you can walk into a yoga studio and it's a little bit stuffy, it's a little bit cliquey, and that can be super intimidating. And I think also when you're dealing with like a bunch of active duty guys, it's just a different vibe. They're silly and they say things that are maybe off color. And I've done some classes where I incorporate, I'm probably going to get shit for this, but I incorporate booze into it because it lightens the mood a little bit. It's kind of like when people have like a drink, they can like speak a foreign language much better. Like it just like calms the nerves. And so I try to do things like that make it a little more accessible, a little more welcoming. And really, for spouses and children, historically, they have been a really underserved part of the military family. And not to say that they're neglected, but there just aren't as many resources for them. I lived in, as you know, Jacksonville, North Carolina. My ex was in the military, so it's been a very long time though since I've been there. My memory of being in a military town is actually kind of fading. I can't remember. But spouses are underserved, and also I think it's a community of people who are very misunderstood. And to go into a yoga studio, and we've talked about these things in different contexts before in terms of like size and race and stuff like that.
But to go into a yoga studio and be the only person who maybe only gets to
Right.
see their husband once a year,
Right.
or, can't actually have a career because they are, quote, married
Right.
to the military,
Right.
there's a
Right.
major disconnect there between
Yeah.
the spouse and then the rest of the community at large.
Right. Right. I mean, that's a huge thing. And I've been kind of like one of these harpies over the years about some of the spouses or some of the things that military spouses struggle with. Like you said, unemployment is a huge problem because you're moving all the time and no one wants to hire you, even though probably a civilian counterpart is jumping jobs more so than you are. You're still like the
There's just
unemployment rate for
almost a guarantee that the
yeah.
military spouse is going to leave.
Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. And they just won't hire you. Or I remember one time I was in an interview for a job and the lady asked me, well, as a military spouse, do you even have access to the internet? And I was like, what kind of a question is that? What does that mean? I was like, of course I don't live in a box. Like I have the internet, we're the same people.
So you're right. Weird.
It's such a weird, it just sticks in my head all the time that she asked that question. And immediately I was like, I'm done with this. But I mean, that's the thing. Like, they're just like a misunderstood group of people that, you don't really understand what it's like, if you're only seeing your husband 6 months out of the year, or you're constantly having these deployments that you're dealing with. And it's really nerve-wracking. Like it's that high stress, constant, like, pulsing through you of just worried about, is my husband okay? How can I get in touch with him? You're trying to like, hold down the fort with, if you have kids, and it's tough, and it's tough on the kids. And I wasn't really aware of it, I think, until I kind of experienced it myself, and not a lot of people talk about it. They talk about PTSD, and that's, serious unto itself, but like secondary PTSD is like a big thing amongst spouses and kids, because you hear about a scary event with your spouse who's active duty, and then, that's triggering for some people. It creates a lot of stress. So and not a lot of people understand that about this little spouse community, of like some of the stressors they're experiencing every day. And I kind of joke, this whole, pandemic thing, it's like military spouses were made for this. Like, we're prepped and ready to go. Like, oh, catastrophe, here we go. We can handle it. So.
Yeah. One thing that you touched on that I think is interesting is that you teach on base for free. And I know there's always this sort of butting heads in the yoga industry about how much yoga should cost. And sometimes I do defend yoga studios because they have overhead, right? And they have to pay bills and stuff like that. And I totally get that. But I do think there is a time and a place for things like free yoga. Now, if we all gave it all for free all the time, of course, it would crash the industry. But there is a time and a place for free yoga. And I think this is a really good example of when we as yoga teachers can be of service and provide complimentary or free offerings.
Right. Yeah, I 100% agree. And I get, like, sometimes for some people, like, this is their job, like you can't just give things away for free, like a service. You just can't give it away for free. And I totally get that. And what I'm still trying to navigate this to find the right balance. But part of me feels like there's like a sliding scale for, if, you want to teach in this population, you don't want to give your services away for free. And trying to know, like, and I hate talking about rank. I really hate it because it can kill a class with military people if you start talking about rank. But having that sliding scale kind of based on, this person's background, like if they're a really young airman or a really young Marine, like, it's a little bit cheaper for the class, or, as it kind of goes up in rank. For example, there are a lot of educational grants and stuff that are available for, active duty people and military spouses. And it's kind of like a sliding thing. Like if you're above a certain rank, then okay, you don't qualify anymore. But if you're below, you do qualify. And so I think that might be the way to go. I don't know the right answer, honestly. And it's something
there might not be a right answer.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I'm not sure, what to do about that, but I've definitely given like private lessons to spouses, and I know some people charge upwards of like $75 for a private lesson, and I'm doing it bare minimum. I try to make it really accessible. Like, they're terrified to go into a yoga studio, but they want to get started somewhere, and this is what they feel comfortable with. So, let's work out something that's a fair price, or if they feel comfortable just doing it with their friends, that kind of thing. So when I am on base, because when you're on base and you're teaching, I guess that's another thing. It gets tricky with charging, because then you have, there's like an organization that kind of controls services that are provided on base. So that's also another motivation for why I do it for free, just to avoid that whole, like, all that paperwork and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah. And sometimes, just like an hour out of your day, once here and there is kind of easy, let me just donate an hour of my time to teach this class, kind of thing. So yeah, that would be my piece of advice. Like, if you are going to teach on base and you want to charge, sometimes there can be a ton of paperwork to kind of get there. But, if you do it for free, it is much easier. You just go in, teach, and kind of get out.
Whether you're moving through life at high intensity, a steady pace, or adapting to recent shifts, Longwave Yoga's online classes and workshops will help you feel more grounded, at peace, and connected. With a variety of practices, you can now enjoy a class from the comfort of your own space. Longwave Yoga's online workshops include exploration of meditation, either daily or weekly, yoga for young ladies, an online series for tween and teen girls, and yoga for everybody, an inclusivity workshop. To participate in these offerings, pre-register at longwaveyoga.com. That's LONGWAVEYOGA.com. You will receive a confirmation email with details on accessing your online yoga class. Longwave Yoga looks forward to practicing with you in the digital world and remaining connected. Again, that's longwaveyoga.com. So I guess along the same lines you were saying, a little bit of advice for folks who maybe want to teach on base. In that same vein of conversation, for yoga teachers who maybe are not used to working with military families, I've seen a lot of training in the past about like how to teach military members, and like some ideas about language and stuff to use. But you know, if you're not around the military every day, and especially if you're not living near a military base, you might not cross a military family too often. So it's not something that's practice. So do you have some tips that maybe any yoga teacher could do at any time someone from the military joins their classes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say one of my, I guess my biggest piece of advice is to keep rank out of it. Don't even bring it up. Don't talk about it. It can kill a class or a conversation in 1 second. It just kills it. Because if you have a class, either full of spouses or full of active duty folks, and you point out an officer in the room, it is going to just kill the dynamic. Everyone's going to act differently now. They're going to straighten up and not have fun. And it's just a real killer. And I'll tell you, just like anecdotally, I had a situation where I was going to a yoga class. My husband had just gotten home from a deployment, and the teacher kind of called me out, and she was like, "Your husband is rank," and she just assumed, and blah blah blah. And I said, I felt put on the spot, and I was like, "No, he's actually X, Y, and Z." And the whole room just changed, and I felt like now I'm not welcome here anymore. Like now the cat's out of the bag. I'm not welcome here anymore. And so it just really, having been, I don't want to say a victim of it, but having experienced it myself, it can really kill a class. So I always tell folks, don't talk about it. Maybe ask them, "Oh, what do you do?" But not what their rank is, just because it's so sensitive, and it really is a mood killer, and you don't want to do that right off the bat.
Yeah, and even just from first of all, just a teaching perspective, it's not safe to put anyone on blast in your class at any time.
Right, exactly.
About anything, but even just from the perspective of the yogic teachings, there is no rank in yoga. right. And
Right.
when we're talking
Right.
about the body, mind, and spirit, there is no rank. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So
Exactly.
to assign that in a yoga class, then it immediately diminishes the teaching, saying that we're not equal, we're not one, that now we
Right.
have this hierarchy, which is not
Right.
what happens in the teaching.
Right.
Yeah, so I think
Exactly.
that's a good practice for any yoga teacher in
Yeah.
any class.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. It's just, yeah, it's just like, it just kills the whole thing. And, so yeah, I always tell people just like keep it out of the classroom entirely. The other thing is, and this is a weird one. Well, not really weird, but you always hear, everyone wants to offer. If you see someone hurting or if you see someone like struggling, the natural instinct is to help, like give advice in some way. And so you have spouses or active duty members come into your class and they might mention like, oh, I've had a bad week, or you just see them struggling. And so I think sometimes the worst thing you can do to this community is to offer advice on something you don't really know anything about. It's kind of like, thanks for the advice, but that doesn't help me at all.
Mhm.
I think the best thing for yoga teachers to do is just be more empathetic rather than trying to help or offer advice. And I think that probably just goes for the general population as well, and I kind of been trained to like keep a line between professional and personal in the yoga studio. You don't want to get too personal. You don't ask too many personal questions. You want to just keep it professional. You're in there to teach, and that's what you do, and you help people in that way. And but sometimes it's just human instinct. You see someone struggling, you see them suffering or hurting in some way, you're just going to offer some piece of advice. And I think really for folks who are married to the military, sometimes you just want someone to listen to you. Like if you start vomiting like everything that's been building up for that week, just someone just to like take all that baggage from, just listen while I just, vomit out all of my problems. But I have seen that sometimes where, you're working with a bunch of military folks and they just want to offer some sort of advice. And it's kind of like, thanks, but, can you just not offer advice? So
Yeah,
like I said, it's a weird one, but
well, and I think too, the way I approach this, and there are, because Wilmington is close to Camp Lejeune, or I should say Camp Lejeune because it's Creole and Lejeune is the correct pronunciation. But, we're close to Jacksonville here in Wilmington, North Carolina. So I come across some military members sometimes, not too often. But military or not, one thing that I've been working on in my own work as a yoga teacher, see, I was taught in my teacher training program, and I just witnessed teachers from all over the place do a lot of, I don't even know what the right word is. It's not proselytizing, it's not preaching, but it's this like, it's almost like the Dharma talk thing in the beginning of class. Like, let me tell you what you need to know.
Yeah.
That I don't think translates well, I would imagine, to military members or even people like me. It doesn't feel good. I don't need to know what's right for your life. But what I've been trying to do is just offer a concept and let it go. And let them figure out what it means for them in their lives. And if it means nothing, cool, they can just do yoga.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was doing a class, or I was streaming a class the other day, and someone brought up a concept, and it's like, I'm blanking on it right now, but I was like, oh, that means so. And she just like offered it out there, and there was no like, let me preach at you for 25 minutes. It's like, let me just tell you this little tidbit of information, use it how you will, kind of thing. And like, I think that's really valuable, like in this community or to anyone, like it's just super valuable, like offer a little piece of advice, like a little tidbit of information, and just let it go. Let plant the seed and let it grow, kind of thing. And I think that really is what works in our community, because I can say, like, for a lot of military families, we've just seen it all kind of thing. So there's not much like advice people can offer that we're like, oh, wow, that changes my whole life, kind of thing. So not to say that we're all knowing, but we've just seen it all, kind of thing. So,
well, the change has to come from within too. You know what I mean? And so they'll arrive, military members or not, or military families or not, they'll arrive at whatever they need to arrive at. One thing that I like to do that might be helpful, I don't know if this would work for military families, but I like to do this in my own classes, is at the end of class, before we close things out, when like the last few moments of seated meditation, I ask for my classes to reflect upon their own practice and decide what it is they learned that they can
Right.
incorporate in their bodies or their lives. And I remind them that when they do that work, they are the teacher, not me.
Right.
And so
Exactly.
that might be a helpful thing for folks if you're not sure, how to maybe have empathy or to like give some sort of guidance, but without being like holding hands, that's a nice way
Right.
to do it too.
Right, right. It reminds me of, I hate to go back to Western Maryland, but since that's our like common thread, there was a physics teacher at our high school, Mr. Witt, I think his
Oh my
name
gosh, I forgot
was.
all
Remember?
about him.
Yeah, remember him?
Yep.
And there was like one piece of advice that man gave that has stuck with me my entire life. Like it was like, I probably couldn't calculate half the shit from physics that we learned to calculate back then. Like I probably couldn't do it right now, but this one piece of advice stuck with me my whole life. And he said, the key to being a teacher is never act like you know more than the students. And it's just so appropriate. Like it makes so much sense in like all aspects of life, not even if you're a teacher, just don't act like you know more than the person. Sometimes just offer like a little seed of something and let it grow. And that's how you kind of capture people. And I think, gosh, it's such a good thing. Like in teaching yoga, you can offer just this little kernel of information, and then just, like you said, at the end, have the student reflect on what they've learned, and let them take over being the teacher from there,
For sure. And because we don't know more than the student, we might know different things, right, than the student, but we don't know more. I've had yoga teachers make me feel in the past like, oh God, I just don't know anything. Like everything I need to know you have, and how am I ever going to be able to learn everything that you have, and how can I be more like you? And then I realized, oh, actually you might know a lot about asana, but I know a whole lot about a bunch of other stuff.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and I've had those same experiences where I remember when I was first like learning the whole meditation thing, like learning to meditate, learning to teach it. And I thought, oh, I can never do this. This is horrible. I could never teach this. And then I realized, no, wait a minute, there's a whole spectrum here. And just because, so-and-so does it one way doesn't mean that that's right or wrong. You have the freedom to kind of explore and do your own thing. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of, being free to kind of express yourself and not being stuck in this box of what you think is right or wrong. There's a whole area of gray in there. It's not black or white.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have keep rank out.
Yep.
Try not to offer advice. Have more empathy than advice. Yep. Any other tips that you have for yoga?
Yeah. So this one, these two kind of go hand in hand. And I honestly didn't think of this until I went through Warriors at Ease training, which I highly recommend if any yoga teacher is going to come in contact with the military community, whether it's, a retiree, a vet, active duty, whatever, that they go through this, especially if they're not affiliated with the military in any way. And I personally, even before I really started working with the military community, I never really used Sanskrit in my classes. I just feel like it just wasn't my thing to use it. I feel much more comfortable not using it. But in the military community, it can be triggering. And I know that I just feel like every like hardcore yogi out there is like rolling their eyes right now, and like,
well, if they're rolling their eyes, they're not being very good yogis. They're being judgmental.
Yeah, like, I feel like I get shit for this all the time, but it's something that can be really triggering, particularly for guys who have served like in Iraq, Afghanistan, anywhere kind of overseas in a war zone. Mm-hmm. It can sound like the sounds that they're familiar with in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so it can be really triggering for them. So I really encourage that. Yeah, neither did I. I never thought about it. And then I was like, oh crap, it really could be, because if you're not trained in a specific foreign language, you don't know, you couldn't necessarily pinpoint where it came from. And so this can be super triggering. And the other thing, again, that I didn't think of was certain types of music that you play during your classes. So like stay away from like chanting, because it can also be triggering for some folks. It can almost sound like, and I really mean no disrespect. And I don't think anyone in the military community means disrespect, but it can sound like maybe what they're used to if they left the base and, they're out in the town, like in Afghanistan somewhere. It can sound like maybe a call to prayer or something. It can just be that sort of familiar sound that might be triggering to them. And so you probably want to I would encourage people to be really mindful of the music that they play. I tend to play things music is everything to me in a yoga practice. I don't know why. It's just if the music is like aligning with the postures, it's just magic for me. And so I try to use things that are like, top 40 kind of stuff, or just like the instrumentals that go with that, and not necessarily like chanting or instrumentals that might be, from a different country, if that makes sense. And I don't want it to be offensive because it's not meant to be, but it can be, those sounds can be really triggering for some people. And I didn't even think about that until I went through that training, and they mentioned that sometimes it's more appropriate just to not have any music, but I do feel like, sometimes music just lightens the mood. It gets people like in the mood, or in the mood, and they can.
Most people like to practice with music. Last year, I actually stopped practicing with music, and I love it. And I haven't used music in my yoga practice it's been more than a year now. And I don't know if I could ever really go back to having music. But I mean, when I go to a yoga class and there's music playing, I'm having a good time. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Like some of my favorite classes, I just remember, like all the postures and the sequence, they just align with the beat of the music, and it's just like magic. It's just like it's everything to me. And I've had a few yoga teachers that they'll poke fun at me, like, man, you really get into it. I'm like, you don't understand. It's just like the stars are aligning right now.
You don't get
you don't understand. You don't get it. But I guess certain sounds can be really triggering. I think particularly for active duty guys can be really triggering. And so, it's one of those things, like maybe just not have music. I remember teaching to the fire department on base one time, and I tried to play music, but it just wasn't working. And so I turned it off, and I don't even think they noticed it because they were all just kind of joking around anyway. So probably no music is the way to go if you're really, concerned about it. You don't want to, bother anyone or, so that's one of them. And then I think really only the other thing that and kind of going back to the cost, but not really cost, is that childcare is a big issue for military communities, because you're probably dealing with families that are in the middle of a deployment, and they are, if your husband's deployed and you have kids at home, it's next to impossible to get to a yoga studio, especially if you work. And so you see very few mommy and me, daddy and me yoga classes offered, or maybe even classes that are offered on the weekend, and then maybe have some sort of childcare option available, which I know is hard. And I'm not saying make sure you do this, but to be mindful of it, I think in reaching out to that community, make sure that, it's just something. If you're not seeing a lot of spouses come to your class, well, it might be because, they're dealing with childcare issues and they don't have anywhere for their kids to go. I know one of the studios in a town we used to live in, had a room. You could kind of stuff your kids in there with their iPads. And so stuff the kids in the closet kind of thing. And then, come back to the yoga class, and occasionally a child would walk through the studio while everyone was practicing, and, Mom, can I have a snack kind of thing. And you just deal with it. You just kind of ignore it. But something to kind of accommodate them, because it just makes me so sad when a spouse really truly wants to practice, they need to practice, and they can't because they don't have anyone to watch their kids. They don't, they probably don't know anyone in the town. So, they don't have a babysitter. They can't afford a babysitter and a yoga class. So just something to kind of keep in mind.
I wouldn't even know how to do that, like to deal with it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I'm just thinking about how I would handle childcare if I were teaching this population or any population. I had no idea what I would do.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, I'm not great with kids. So it's not like something I think about all the time. What I will do, like if I'm teaching on base, if I'm offering a class on base, that's kind of a good happy medium, because that way, if you offer it kind of like when the guys are getting ready to like call it a day, like it's like going home time, maybe like 4 or 5 o'clock, offer the class then. The spouse can come on base, leave their husband or leave their kids with the guys there. Like if your friend, your spouse friend is coming for the class and their husband's there, like leave the kids with the husbands and then come to a yoga class, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's like if your husband was at the office, like, okay, let's take the kids to the office, drop them off and let him watch them for a little while. And a lot of times, like in the military community, we have, Christmas parties all the time, and there'll be like a child care room, and it's usually, maybe like some like older kids, like teenage kids who watch the little ones. Yeah. And so if you can kind of time it that way, it works pretty well. But again, it's another thing. If you don't have access to the base, it's really hard to teach a class on base. Like I said, I've seen studios where they have like a separate little room and they can kind of put the kids in there with their iPads, or even in the reception area, which I'm not super thrilled about. I feel like no one's watching the kids out in the reception area. Like you're going to have, it's going to be chaos out there. But I've seen that happen as well. I think people just have to get creative, and it's hard for me, someone not being great with kids, to kind of overlook like kid shenanigans, like the things that kids do. It's hard to.
They make me nervous.
Yeah. Like don't jump off of that piece of furniture or like, like, I don't know what to say to them. And I feel like, I'm the aunt that taught my nieces and nephews how to cuss. So I'm probably going to teach your kids a curse word by accident. I didn't mean to, it's, they may just make me nervous. Yeah. It just makes me nervous to be around kids. But sometimes it's just a matter of like getting creative. I know there was one yoga studio that I taught at in Georgia, and it was in an old, like tanning bed, like business, and they didn't knock down like all the little tanning bed booths. And so the kids could just like go in to like one of the little old tanning bedrooms, and you could hear them because it was all open air. Like there was no like floor to ceiling walls. So you could hear the kids, which is really distracting when you're really trying to like get into your practice. But it's what I feel like you have to be like a little bit flexible in that way.
Do the best you can.
Just kind of muddle through. If the moms would have put in like earplugs, like put in some earplugs to kind of get through it. It's just, kind of, just muddle your way through. But it is a concern. And like I said, I don't know the right answer. I've not seen anyone do it like, oh, that's absolutely the right way to do it. But just kind of get creative, or maybe have, like if you can have like one extra person at the studio that doesn't mind watching kids, like everyone chip in $2 for that person to like watch your kids or something, something that's like accessible. It's like $2 is like pretty easy if everyone just chips in the $2 or, something, so that they get paid for their time. I don't know, the right compensation, but it's something that always holds people back. My neighbor in Georgia, that poor thing, like she just had deployment after deployment after deployment, and had twins that she was taking care of, and could never get out of the house to go work out. And I just kept thinking, gosh, if there was someone, like if we could just find a way for someone to watch her kids for an hour, it would make it so much better for her. So yeah, just another thing to kind of keep on the radar of, and I feel like it gets lumped in with cost too. You know, it's just one of those things. I don't know the right answer. I've not seen anyone do it like 100% right. I don't think there is a right or a wrong way, but just something to be mindful of in that community.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this then. I guess on the flip side, we have some really good advice for teachers. Do you have any tips that you would offer military members, or in particular military spouses, if they are going to a yoga class? And maybe in particular, if it's not one that's designed for military families specifically?
Yeah. So I think, gosh, well, I think for the spouses, I think one of the things that I hear all of these spouses say, and it's not even like a spouse thing. I think it's just in general, people being afraid to walk into a yoga class. They think, well, I don't look like those people on Instagram, or, you know,
me either.
I don't. And I tell them, like, I have some weird, like, you know, I think that's, you know, that's like a whole other discussion, social media and yoga, but like you know, that's one of the things that scares them off. And I remember when I was teaching, when I was getting certified and I had to teach my final class, like right before I was finished my certification, I made sure that I packed the room with all my friends that were all different body types and all different skill levels and, you know, abilities. And I wanted people to see, like, look, you don't have to be rail thin and put your leg behind your head the first time you do yoga. And I think that's the thing that I try to preach at military schools, or try to remind them of, like, it's okay if this is your first time, like if you don't even know what a down dog is, it's okay. Mm-hmm. You'll learn, you'll get there. Practice makes better. It doesn't make perfect. And you know what? So what if your heels don't touch the ground? There might be a reason for that, you know? And I try really hard.
Never have, never will.
Exactly. I have like weird hip issues. I'll never be able to do a split. Like, it just is what it is. And I remember, you know, like I had someone in one of my classes, she's like, you can't do a split. You're not a real yoga teacher. Like, and I was like, no, that's not what this is about. Like, it's, you know, it's one of those, like, I think it's such like a misconception out there, like amongst, you know, it's not just, like I said, like in the military community, that people are, you know, they see these images online and they think, oh, that's what it's supposed to be. You know, you're supposed to do this pose and it's supposed to look this way. And so I really try to drive that home with any of the spouses that I'm talking to, that, hey, it's okay. And it's okay if you show up in sweatpants. Like, you don't have to show up in your Lululemons. Like, it's totally fine. You don't have to look a certain way. I just want you to come in and feel comfortable. And if you feel comfortable in, you know, pair of sweatpants, like, do it. You know, that's what you feel comfortable in. Or I've had, you know, I have a spouse that I've been teaching for a while that refuses to take her socks off. And just, okay, fine. If that's what works for you, like, don't take your socks off. Like, we'll get there, you know, like those sorts of things. So I try to remind them of that, because I think that's kind of like the biggest barrier that I hear in the community. And then, like, with the active duty, particularly with guys, I think girls, it's very different, but with guys, you know, there's like a stigma with guys going to yoga. And I think particularly like these active duty guys think that it's like a girly thing. Like, oh, this is like a wussy kind of workout. Why am I doing this? You know, I don't need this. I don't need to do yoga. I can run 6 miles in 10 minutes or something. And I
never heard that before from a guy.
Yeah, like, you know, like, it's just like, you know, it's that whole thing where they just feel like, I don't need this. I don't need to do yoga. You know, it's a girly thing to do. And then like, I just am like, okay, well, touch your toes, you know, like, can you do like something, like I've tried to like joke around, like make a joke about it, like, man, you can't even touch your toes. Like, not that you have to, but like trying to like prove a point, like, we could really, you know, you could really improve some of your like physical ability if you came to yoga. And at the same time, like, de-stress a little along the way and learn some skills for how to control stress in your life. So I think those are some of my pieces of advice for, I'm not sure that I have any for kids, just because I'm not sure that they would really understand, but
I don't
for
understand
spouse,
kids, so
yeah,
it's fine.
same, yeah. I'm like, let's just come in here and breathe through this for a minute.
When you're
But
talking about guys doing yoga, it just reminded me of this time. I think it was last summer. I was like at a cookout or something, and some guy was like, "Hey, you're a yoga teacher. I can't touch my toes." And I was like, "I can help you learn how to touch your toes." And I was like, "Can you show me what you do?" And it's like many people who say they can't touch their toes, who's basically just rounding his upper back. Like, I can't touch my toes. And I was like, "Okay, well, bend your knees and hinge forward, and kind of instruct him through it." And he was able to touch his toes, but then he was like, "But this is bullshit because I'm bending my knees."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, but like, you're not
like,
able to, if you've never touched your toes in 40 years, you're not just
right.
gonna suddenly be able to touch your toes without bending your knees."
Exactly. Like, it's just, they just totally don't get it. I remember, I'll never forget when I was teaching the fire department, there was a guy and he wasn't going to join the class, and he kept kind of like walking through towards the beginning, and all the other guys were giving him shit about it. Like, if we've got to do it, you've got to do it. And he finally joined the class, and he was enormous. This guy was so big. Like, he was probably like 6'5". I mean, I'm short, so he like looked like 7 feet tall and like just like muscles everywhere. And he's like, I don't need this. And the poor guy, I was trying so hard to get them into Eagle Arms, like, which a lot of them just couldn't do. And he, not at all. Like, he could barely hug himself. I was like, okay, well, let's try to hug yourself, like raise your elbows. And he just couldn't, couldn't do it. And at the end, it was like, I think a really humbling experience for him. He's like, oh, well, maybe I do need to do this like regularly. But yeah, I mean, I've had other guys that are like, I'll talk to, like, go to picnics with my husband, like on base, and I'll try to like recruit people. And they're just not having anything to do with, like, this is bullshit. I'm bending my knees. Like, I could just bend my knees and touch my toes. Like, anyone can do that kind of thing. And they're just not biting. And sometimes I feel like, okay, let me just give them like not a hard pose to do, but one that I know that they can't really do, and see if, maybe I can recruit them that way, which I feel like is terrible. I shouldn't even do that. But, like, just something like, let's just see your down dog real quick and see what we got to work with.
It's a different demographic too, where I think people are maybe a little more up to the challenge.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? If you just go to the grocery store and you see like average surfer Joe, he's probably like, yeah, bro, I'll go do some yoga. But with like a guy in the military, I think that sometimes it's like, oh, well, show me your down dog. And then when it's really hard, they're like, okay, cool, I'll try this.
It does. It's like kind of contagious. There was a guy at our last base, he did yoga quite a bit, but he never talked about it. No one knew that this guy did yoga. It was very, very private for him. And he mentioned it to me. And he and I were at this picnic, and we were kind of just like showing each other some moves or something like that, like different modifications, whatever. And other guys it became kind of like this competition, like, oh, that's how you can do crow. Let me show you, like, I can do it better than you. And then finally people started to follow suit. So I feel like, that's like another good way to like reel them in. Like, if you can get one guy to show off, then they'll maybe follow suit.
And maybe more traditional yogis might be like, what are you two talking about? But here's the deal. And it goes back to something you said too about the booze and yoga, whatever.
Yeah.
I particularly don't, like, I do drink and I do yoga. I just don't do them together. And I don't teach that way, but here's what I do believe. Whatever brings you to the practice has brought you to the practice, and that's good. That's it.
Exactly.
End of story. And maybe it stops there. Maybe it stops with doing a crow pose a couple of times and having a lot of fun with your friends, or maybe it stops with a few yoga and beer classes and you learn something, or maybe it turns into a whole other thing in your life. All of that is good, and all of that is fine.
Right. Exactly. It's like it's like planting that seed, and no matter how big that seed is or how much it grows, it's there. And I know that I think sometimes I feel like I'm like the bad yogi for my approach to some of this, but it's all about just like, like reeling people in. Like, I know it helped me. It helped me through a horrible, horrible deployment. And if I can just give people like just like a kernel of that, just like a piece of that where they can like breathe through the tough times or know how to control some of the deal with some of the uncontrollable moments in their life, then I did my job, and if that meant that I had to give them a glass of wine to get them there, then, I still did my job.
You can lure me somewhere with a beer.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a
Exactly.
beer. It's like a dangling carrot. I'm following right along.
Exactly. Like, oh, you want to pour me a cocktail? Okay, I'm there.
Fine, I'm there. So one other thing that you mentioned, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about before we part ways today. You mentioned the program Warriors at Ease. Can you tell the Dharma Drops audience a little more about what that is and maybe how they can get more information?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are let me back up. Warriors at Ease, it's specifically for the military community. So not just active duty guys, but veterans, no matter how long they served, and retirees. And the whole training course, there are 2 levels of training. Level 1 is all online. You can do it through Yoga International. And then the other one, level 2, is an in-person. I think it's like a weekend course, and they offer it kind of peppered throughout the US throughout the year. But it really gives, just like a snapshot into the lives of people in the military community going through like a lot of the struggles that I mentioned briefly. Some of the, things that you're going to deal with when you're teaching like a group of active duty guys or a group of military spouses. It goes through sort of the demographics from each of the 4 branches of the military. Like, not a lot of people maybe know that there are far more people in the Army than there are in other branches. So
and they're
things.
Very different. They're different communities.
Oh yeah, totally different. The lingo. I mean, like, we're an Air Force family. Everyone calls us the chair force. Like, there's just these little like military isms that you learn, and they're good to know because it's totally part of our lingo, and we're not being disrespectful. It's just is what it is, and they, one of the great things that I love is, part of this training, they do interview some children and talk about some of the challenges that the children face, and it's coming straight from kids. And they bring in military spouses, some of the challenges that we face. They talk to the National Guard and the reserves, which, everyone thinks of them as being part of the military, but when you're in the military, you don't really consider them to be like part of the DoD. It's weird because there's so many divisions. And so they talk to the Guard and the reserves. Another great thing that I loved about this training was that they talked about, obviously if you're dealing with the military community, particularly the guys that were on active duty, you're going to be dealing with some injuries, and especially like the longer someone served, the more like broken down their body gets. Like, I even tell my husband there's like a slouch that they get, and my husband like totally has that slouch. It's like this weird, like, I don't even know, like, it's like it starts in their knees. It's like this weird slouch that they get. And so they go through all of that, and then amputations. And I think that's not something a lot of yoga teachers encounter in their classes a lot, is if you're dealing with someone that has an amputation, and they talk about how to sequence a class to meet the needs of someone who, has an amputated arm or leg or both. It also talks about, like I said, like we talked about, like the, being mindful of the music and not using Sanskrit and things like that. Another little thing that they talk about, like in terms of like teaching a class, things to be mindful of, are like a lot of times for guys who have experienced a lot of like PTSD, who've, been downrange, on the front lines, facing a door is really important to them to feel secure. So I've always been in yoga classes where my back is to the door. I've never been facing the door, and I never thought that would be a problem until this class mentioned that is a problem.
Yeah.
And so to be mindful of that, make sure you're, positioning the class appropriately. You're saying appropriate things, reminding people you don't have to close your eyes. You can leave your eyes open, because a lot of times we sit there, okay, close your eyes, relax, and for some people it's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, they go through all of that. It's so fantastic for folks. I got a lot out of it, and I've been a part of this military community for over 10 years. So it's, I was familiar with a lot of these things, but there were some things, again, like I didn't realize, oh, music could be triggering. So just to be, having that little bit of information, I think could be really helpful to any yoga teacher that is ever going to cross paths with, a military member, especially if you're teaching like in a military community, if you have a base in your town.
I just finished, this is different, but I just finished the Yoga for All training with Diane Bondi and Amber Carnes. And, the Warriors of Eve and the Yoga for All sound like they're totally different. And, in terms of course, what content they're teaching. But I think where they're similar and where a lot of trainings are similar, none of this is rocket science. And it's really easy for yoga teachers to make accommodations for anyone. Just sometimes you need someone to point out things that maybe you just never thought of, like facing the door. Wouldn't have thought about it, right? But that's like a really easy thing to fix in your yoga class. And I think the same thing was true in the Yoga for All training. I was like, oh, all of this is really easy to do. I just need someone to tell me about it,
Right. Exactly. It takes someone just like reminding you, like, hey, wait a minute, this could like bother somebody, or, whatever. And that, I think that was like the other thing about this training. They did touch on military sexual assault, which we hear about it, but we don't really talk about it. And there were a lot of really good tips, because like yoga can be like, some of the postures can be really sexual. Like if you let your head go there, like it can be, and it can be triggering for people. And I would have, Happy Baby was something that was always a part of like all of my sequences. Like that's how I end. And then I thought, oh, that's like not a good idea. I probably should rethink that. And
I teach yoga at UNCW, and I ask them, because the students that I meet at UNCW, usually when they're in my yoga class, they're 17, 18-ish years old. And of course, like the girls with the shortest shorts. And I ask them on the first day, please do not wear short shorts. And then the day I teach them Happy Baby, I'm like, do you see why I asked you to not wear short shorts? And last year, no one listened to me last year. And sometimes when you're dealing with teenagers, you have to just get really blunt. And I said, here's the deal. About to see one more of your vaginas, I'm going to lose my mind. You all need to wear pants.
Exactly. You just have to be blunt. And I think that's like another thing that works in like the military community is like, I don't want to see your balls falling out of your shorts.
Yes. Like, just wear pants and everyone's fine.
Yes, everyone is fine. Nobody is scarred for life.
Yep.
I mean, it's just like you said, like none of this stuff is rocket science. It just sometimes takes someone like a little reminder from someone, like, oh, hey, wait a minute, think about it this way. And I think that Warriors at Ease did a fantastic job of doing that. And they do have, they're like on Instagram and Facebook, and they have a little community directory. So if you do like their certification, you get listed in their directory, which is another thing. Like, yoga teachers, we all have this hustle about us. You want to be listed in all of the like directories so people can find you and, get you to teach a class and stuff. So I think they've been really good about that, about supporting yoga teachers, helping them help the community. And they also go through, how you can get started helping the military community, like, getting started with the VA, like what you need to do there, be mindful of, or like there are different organizations like Red, White, and Blue is one of them. There's like veteran centers. And so they're really good about, the business side of yoga.
That's awesome. So, and you said that's available on Yoga International?
It is. Yep. It's an online course. I think it's 30 or 40 hours. When I did it, I was working full time and doing that like in the evenings. I think it took me like a week or two, well, probably 2 weeks to get through. the whole thing, but it's so fascinating, and like just the fantastic scientific information that they provide and those resources, really applying science to yoga. And it's just such an excellent job. It was really fascinating. And even for someone who's in the community, I thoroughly enjoyed that training. I thought it was excellent. So highly recommend.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to check it out today.
Yeah.
This has been really awesome, and I think an important conversation that is not really talked about a lot in yoga communities. I hear a lot of talk about like bringing mindfulness into the military, but I do feel like the military spouse is often really neglected in these conversations. So I think this is a really important conversation. I'm really happy to put it out on Military Spouse Appreciation Day.
Yes. Thank you for doing that. It's such an overlooked, or not, I don't want to say overlooked, not well known little like military holiday. And I think spouses just deserve, military children get a whole month. Like the whole month of April is military, like a military children's appreciation month or something. But like spouses really are just such a deserving group. So thank you for putting this out on Spouse Appreciation Day.
My pleasure. I'm happy to do so. So is there any last bit that you want to leave the Dharma Drops audience with before we part ways today?
Gosh, well, first of all, thank you for having me. And second of all, if there's just anything, it's because I'm a part of this community. I know what yoga has done for me. I know what it can do for my fellow spouses and their kids and their active duty husbands or wives. And so I just really encourage like any yoga teacher that has the ability to reach out to the military community and teach within it, just do it. It really, I think sometimes it saves lives. It just saves us from ourselves kind of thing. And so if I can get the word out in any way, I hope that I've done that to help my community, just be a little bit stronger and have more resources. Like I said, we've, historically, there's just been fewer resources for the spouses and the children. And I think this is one way we can take it out of the hands of Uncle Sam and just say, here, let me help you. This is a tool. You don't have to go on base to get it. You can come here and find peace.
So awesome. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm sure the folks that you're working with are deeply appreciative too. As well as the Dharma Drops community for all your great information today, because this is something we have not talked about on the show at all. If folks want to learn more about you and your offerings, do you have a website or Instagram that they can find you at?
I do. I have an Instagram. It's Reveille and Shine Yoga. Check us out. We're kind of young, so I'm learning my way through all of this, but I would love if you just check out our page and get little tips and tricks for teaching in the military community or different, challenges we face. Hopefully all that information is helpful to someone.
Yeah, for sure. And what I'll do, guys, is for those of you listening, I'll put the link to the Instagram page on the show notes so you can access it there. And then, of course, guys, you can always find more information about Dharma Drops on Instagram at Dharma Drops Podcast, and all of the shenanigans are on dharmadropspodcast.com. Sherry, I can't believe we've known each other our whole lives.
I know. And it's an eternity. It's so crazy that this is like what brought us back together.
I know.
We keep in touch like through like, social media or whatever. But like, it's crazy that this was the common thread coming from a town that had like no like yoga studios at all.
Interesting. I know.
So
from
crazy.
No yoga to all the yoga. It's so interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Had you asked me, when we were in second grade with our building company in the loft of my parents' cabin in the mountains, I would not have said that we'd be on a podcast together talking about yoga.
Right. Exactly. I would have never thought this is how it would like come back together, but here we are.
I'm glad it did. It's so cool.
Yeah, escaped Western Maryland, living in bigger cities.
All right, guys. Well, that's it for this episode of Dharma Drops Podcast. Until we meet again next time. Bye, friends. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Dharma Drops. And just to help make your day a little bit brighter, little Hanky wants to do a trick for you. Hanky, speak. Yeah, good boy. One more time. Hanky, speak. Yeah, good boy. Don't forget, if you want to follow all the Dharma Drops shenanigans, you can find me at dharmadropspodcast.com and on Instagram at Dharma Drops Podcast. Additionally, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Dharma Drops Podcast on whatever app you're listening on. It's a great way to show your support and to share the podcast with others. Okay, my friends, that's it for this episode. Hank wants to say bye to you guys. Hanky, speak. Yeah, good boy. All right. Bye, guys.